Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. My name is Chuck Lennox with the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation. I want to welcome you to our webinar series today, Global Excellence in Heritage Interpretation. The Global Alliance is an umbrella organization of international interpretive groups around the world who are working together to support the growth of heritage interpretation as a profession and support the professional development of interpreters. I'd like to thank Time Looper and Agents of Discovery for their support of our translation service. In closing, I'd like to remind you that interpretation is a seed, not a tree. Let's plant some more seeds. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the webinar today.
Hello, I'm Beth Moravon, Chair of the Association for Heritage Interpretation, the UK membership organisation for natural and cultural heritage interpreters. I'm delighted to be part of the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation Steering Committee and welcome you to our webinar series, Global Excellence in Heritage Interpretation. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, bonjour, my name is Sarah Rao and I am the Vice Chair for Interpretation Canada. We are a community that recognizes, celebrates, debates and inspires heritage interpretation in Canada, and we are thrilled to be taking part in the GAHI webinar series. We hope you enjoy.
Hi, I'm Kylie Christian, President of Interpretation Australia, and I'm really glad to welcome you to the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation's webinar series. We love being part of it, and we hope you love it too.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings to you all. My name is Nick and I am the Chair of the Interpretation Network of New Zealand. We are a network designed to bring together interpretation professionals and showcase the best practice happening around our beautiful country of Aotearoa New Zealand. Please enjoy this webinar from our international colleagues in the Global Alliance of Heritage Interpretation. Kia ora.
Hello, I'm Helena Vicic and I'm representing Interpret Europe, a European Association for Heritage Interpretation. We're very excited about this opportunity of sharing excellence across the world. We're digging up knowledge here in Europe that can have a potential to inspire colleagues from other continents. And vice versa, the inspiration in the Global Alliance is guaranteed to come back. Global Alliance of Heritage Interpretation with the webinar series is a treasure box of inspiration and good practice that promotes high standards of heritage interpretation globally.
Hi there, I am Paul Caputo, Executive Director for the National Association for Interpretation. We serve 6,000 heritage interpreters in the United States. We are thrilled to be one of the organizing partners of the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation year-long free webinar series. Enjoy.
Hello, you've met me via tape. Now I am live, and good afternoon, good morning, afternoon, or evening, as I mentioned before, wherever you might be. My name is Chuck Lennox with the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation, and I want to welcome you to our third webinar this year in our series, Global Excellence in Heritage Interpretation. Today, hosted by the Interpretive Network of New Zealand. Today's webinar, Nature, Merging Māori Knowledge and Science to Spark Sustainable Action. Please put any questions you have during while our speaker is talking in the question box, in the Q&A box, and we'll answer them at the end of the talk. Let me pass the screen over to my colleague, Nick Yates from INNZ to introduce our speaker. Thank you for joining us.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Nick tōku ingoa. My name is Nick and I'm the Chair of Interpretation New Zealand. So we are the interpretation network based in the country of Aotearoa New Zealand, and we are a network designed to bring together interpretation professionals and share best practice from around our beautiful country. So today it is my privilege to welcome our speaker, Frith Williams. So Frith Williams is the head of experience design and content at Te Papa Tongarewa, which is New Zealand's national museum based in Wellington. She is a career interpreter with a focus on museum experience design specifically, spanning nearly 19 years at Te Papa. So I've had the privilege of learning from Frith myself, working on a very similar project at Tamaki Paengahira Auckland Museum. And she'll be talking about that particular project, Te Taiao Nature, today in the webinar. So Te Taiao Nature weaves together mātauranga Māori knowledge and science in order to encourage sustainability in the visitors to Te Papa. She has an extensive concept development background, also with digital writing and education, which resulted in her joining Te Papa first, leading the writing team, but now heading the exhibition and experience development role, which she is now holding. Cool, over to you, Frith.
All right, thank you very much for the introduction, Nick. And thank you for having me, everyone, and for being here too across all your different time zones. I hope the hour isn't too crazy where you are. As you know, called Frith Williams Aho, my name is Frith and I head the experience design and content team at Te Papa. That means that I am lucky enough to lead a team of writers, experience developers, digital producers, and designers. I've been asked to speak about the development of Te Taiao today. It's a relatively new natural history zone. It actually opened in 2019, just before COVID. So we're really only returning to full visitation now. But before I go into that, I thought I'd give you a bit of an overview about Te Papa in case you don't know too much about us. So I'll do that for 5 minutes. I'll just share my screen. All right, oops. Can everybody see that? I hope so.
All good, yep.
Yep.
Great,
Good.
fantastic. Okay, so Te Papa, thanks Felix, I'm not good. This is where we're located on Wellington's waterfront. I wish I could say it looked like this every day. It does today actually, but we are known as Windy Wellington for a good reason. This was our opening in 1998, a pretty amazing photo, almost a group hug around the building. And I think it really represents the sea change at the time where we were trying to reach a much more diverse audience than before. The earliest iteration of the museum, though, goes back about 150 years to the Colonial Museum. When we opened, we merged the National Museum with the National Art Gallery. So our collections cover cultural history, natural history, and art. That was a little controversial at the time, and for some it still is. Our funding, 50% of it comes from the central government, and we have to make the other 50% ourselves in order to operate. So a few key statistics here, notably, we get around 1.5 million visits annually, a bit lower still post-COVID, but we're pretty happy with that, particularly relative to the national population of just 5 million. They tend to be around 50% national and 50% international. 2 million plus collection items. You can see the colossal squid there. He's kind of like our dino, really. Fun fact, we sit on 150 shock absorbers because we are built on a fault line. It's very important to keep our collections safe. And we're free to enter, except for touring shows. Here are some current statistics on the ethnicity of our audience relative to the population. So in the green there, you see the proportion of the New Zealand population, and in the blue, the proportion of the Te Papa audience. So we've really grown our Māori audience close to the proportion of the population. We've still got 2% to work on there. We do have more work to do to represent and attract Pacific visitors. You can see a gap over there on the right. So to date, Te Papa has been celebrated for its biculturalism. We are grounded in Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the treaty. This is New Zealand's founding document, signed in 1840 by the British Crown and a large number of Māori chiefs. Those principles of the treaty, partnership, participation, and protection inform everything from Te Papa's bicultural leadership structure. We have a CEO and a Māori leader, the Kaihotu, right through to our daily activities, including exhibition development. There's another key expression of biculturalism is the philosophy of mātauranga, and that really recognises the critical role of communities in the understanding, care and presentation of their collections and stories. I would add that although Te Papa is often celebrated for biculturalism, we in the museum are very conscious that we're still on a journey towards genuine partnership. We still often get things wrong. This new strategy actually aims to re-cement and extend on our bicultural foundations. You can see the vision down the bottom, truly treaty-based museum where Māori exercise tino rangatiratanga, self-determination. I'm also very conscious that I, especially speaking alone, cannot represent biculturalism, and also that anything that my team and I are involved in, including Te Taiao nature, is very much supported by the hard work and advocacy of many others, including many others before us. If you want to know more about our bicultural journey and particularly the re-indigenisation of museums, I'd really recommend looking up Puawai Cairns, my amazing boss, who's done a lot of writing and speaking in that space. And you could also look up Te Papa's wider work with iwi, Māori tribes. We have a number of very committed and experienced groups working in this area, including our iwi relations group, National Services, which provides support to iwi and other smaller galleries and museums around the country, and Karanga Aotearoa, which repatriates Māori human remains from overseas. So lots of info on our website about that. So all of those foundations really set the scene for the redevelopment of our natural history galleries. This was the first redevelopment in 20 years. So today I'm going to talk a bit about how the project was set up, how we approached it in terms of the audience experience and also its audience impact to date, or what we know about that. But to sum up the general intent, we knew from the start that we wanted to explore mātauranga and science together, as you know. We wanted to confront environmental challenges like climate change and spark sustainable action. That was very related to the museum mission at the time, which was changing hearts, minds, lives, so very active. There was an emerging comfort in taking a stand on issues like environmental sustainability, not being a passive observer. I think that's probably more common in the sector now, a little less so in 2016 when the development began. We certainly weren't going to entertain any question around whether climate change was happening. For us, the science was clear. And the third intent was to create an immersive and interactive experience, because this type of experience supports memorability and learning. We also knew that we didn't want to try and recreate the natural world itself. Rather, we wanted to inspire people to go outside in it, because it is just outside, particularly here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So our first step, we consulted with our internal experts, our natural history curators. We then went wider to experts from around the country in mātauranga and science in 2 workshops. And then we also had workshops with iwi tribal leaders, 2 of those too. And we asked them questions like, what are the pressing issues for you and your communities around the environment? What are your aspirations for your communities in the natural world? And from those groups, we identified not just important ideas, but also important people to continue collaborating with and to form the project team. In particular, we brought on external expert Brad Harmey to join the team. Obviously, that bicultural partnership around content was critical. So Brad was our lead mātauranga curator alongside our lead science curator, Leon Perry. And Brad continued to draw on the knowledge of other experts involved in the earlier consultation. I would say, ideally, we would have had somebody permanently on staff for this project. I think it's always harder for externals to feel fully empowered. We do have various mātauranga experts in-house, but unfortunately not with an environmental focus. So we were very lucky to have Brad. Others in the core team that you see here, Ralph and Jen, were our lead experience developers, bringing that audience perspective and creative storytelling skills. And Clayton, our lead spatial designer. So this group really drove the overall concept from beginning to end. But there were many, many others involved, as you can see in the list at the top, and the pick down the bottom, a few from the installation phase. I do want to give special acknowledgement to Clayton McGregor, who sadly passed away last year, far too young. But for us, he very much lives on in the exhibition and in our museum. In terms of the team's approach, for the concept itself, they didn't just work with the ideas voiced in the consultation. They also took into account our collections and scholarship around them, visitor research on our past exhibitions. They also interviewed our hosts on their observations, as you can see here, and they observed visitors in the galleries themselves. They looked at academic research into New Zealanders' environmental attitudes, as well as the psychology of behaviour change, since that's really what we were aiming for. Once the team had early concepts, they tested them with diverse groups around the country, asking questions like, what matters to you about the environment, and how do you want us to explore those topics? So you can see some of the quotes here, especially in relation to the environmental issues, where they really voiced a strong desire for a positive, uplifting experience. They wanted fun, success stories, definitely not a depressing to-do list. Our target audiences, from a demographic perspective, were cross-generational families, young Māori and repeat visitors. Already, we're pretty good at attracting these audiences, but we wanted to do even more. We also think about our audiences in terms of their psychographic characteristics. We use Morris Hargreaves McIntyre's culture segments, which are based on what motivates people to visit. And we targeted these three segments, which collectively make up around 60% of our audience. They're quite aligned in what they're looking for, collaboration, innovation, edutainment, so that really supported a cohesive experience. We weren't trying to please everyone, and certainly not a very traditional museum-going audience. Another thing about Te Papa's audience is that 80% come with others, so they're looking for something to do together, and that really influenced our approach too. Our interpretive principles for the development were based on what those target audiences wanted, which we knew from the testing and our broader knowledge, and what we know about museum-based learning and storytelling, especially around the importance of social and physical learning, which you see number 3 and 4. So these principles guided what sorts of experiences we invested in and how we created them, more than the content itself. So I'll come back to them later. They're especially important in relation to impact. The core team poured over all the information to this point, and they homed in on 3 big ideas only. Taonga, the specific traits that make New Zealand's environment unique, not traits common in other environments. So we're talking about things like gigantism, flightlessness, and endemism. The biggest environmental threats we're facing: pests, freshwater quality, ocean health, and of course climate change. And then the positive action that people are taking in response, kaitiakitanga. 2 key underlying ideas which are core to a Māori understanding of the natural world are Māori, the life force in all things that creates abundance, and whānaungatanga, connection, the idea that humans are part of, not separate from nature, as perhaps Western society may have had it. So those ideas formed the structure from uniqueness and wonder in the green, and then coming up into the red, through threat, which is that middle circle, actually a nest, and then onto action in the blue, with a number of wow moments throughout, which you'll see in those pictures there. Our guiding motto was from connection to action, because we knew from environmental psychology that facts in themselves don't spark change. Change begins with emotional connection, that uniqueness and wonder. So the exhibition really had to begin in that way. A big part of the emotional connection came with Brad Harmy's idea that Maui should be our guide and narrator and welcome visitors in. You probably know Maui, maybe from the film Moana, a great Pacific hero who some say was the first to arrive in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So here you see him arriving as the visitors also arrived at the exhibition. As he explores the new land, so do our visitors. So it's a bit like letting them be the protagonists in the story. Maui's voice is the voice of the show, as you can read there. And Maui really represents the human relationship with the environment. He's an explorer. He's also a cheeky trickster. He pushes too far, he exploits, but he also has the potential to solve environmental problems. He's a shapeshifter, a magic maker, an innovator. So really he is us, he's relatable. The Makawhio people of Mahitahi in Southwestland say that Maui arrived there. So our team went down and stayed with them on their marae and learned from them and were guided by them. It's part of that philosophy of mātauranga that I talked about earlier, connecting with community knowledge holders and following their lead. And what the team learned from that experience informed the exhibition entrance, which is an abstract representation of mountains in the area looming up from the sea, what Maui would have seen on arriving. Two artists and carvers from the area also were key to developing aspects of the exhibition, Vane Robinson and Ricky Manuel. You'll see some of their work on other slides. So using Maui as the narrator was very much about emotional connection. You can see these two little kids just last week. This photo was taken quite gripped by that arrival experience. But equally importantly, Maui helped us share Māori perspectives and knowledge throughout. Another example is in Whakaruamoko, Active Land, which explores the section that explores the geological forces that underlie New Zealand's unique natural environment. From a mātauranga point of view, this is the realm of Ruamoko, god of earthquakes and volcanoes. And so you can see here, Māori and science perspectives on the origin of our volcanoes side by side. On the right, wall panels, you'll see the story of the caldera underlying our very active line of fire. And on the floor tiles, you see the story of Ngā Tōroirangi, ancestor of the Ngāti Tuwharetoa people. When he found himself freezing on Mount Tongariro, he's said to have called to his sisters for warmth, and they sent it in the form of taniwha, spirits, which created the line of fire extending from the Pacific to the central North Island. So a really nice parallel in knowledge systems that's physicalized in the galleries. Brad Harmy also worked with Ngāti Tuwharetoa on this section, also with young artists. On the left here, you see a representation of Ruamoko, that god of earthquakes and volcanoes, and his moko, his tattoo, on his face represents the carved landscape that's created by earthquakes, as you see in the photos around him. So what do we know about the audience response to this presentation of Māori knowledge, which we expressed as much as possible from Māori's point of view? Well, they quite regularly identify it as a highlight, unprompted. So we don't ask this question, they offer it, which is really great to see. And the Māori language is also interwoven into the English text, much how New Zealanders increasingly speak today. And you can see an example on the right, and you can see that that's noticed and appreciated too by our visitors. Coming back to our interpretive principles now, as I said, they're more about the how than the what, the type of experience, very much central to how visitors receive information. I've already talked about Māori representing that principle of relatability and emotional connection. He actually appears throughout the show, including in funny shadow plays with the now extinct moa. You see that on the right. He lays challenges for us, as you see on the left. He's also at the end, taking environmental action alongside other New Zealanders. So I'll show you some other examples of this interpretive principle and then what we know about the impact of that approach. So another way that we try to establish connection is through a sense of character in our wildlife, which Maui introduces. So just after the entrance, you meet the odd bunch. It's a giant moa, a very peculiar parrot known to munch through windscreen wipers. You meet croakless frogs, the thieving weka stealing a spoon, and many more characters. So they're really like kind of eccentric family members. And that's also connects to the underlying idea of whānaungatanga familyhood, the reality that we're part of, not separate from the natural world. And wherever possible, we try to keep up that sense of character, for example, in taxidermying specimens to reflect certain personality or dynamic, like the cute kiwi in the top there, and villainous cats who threaten our native birds. And again, you see the shadow play behind the moa, where they come to life in humorous scenes. So all these elements help to make the storytelling sticky, if you like, and memorable. What do we know about the impact on our visitors of this and other interpretive principles? Well, visitors feel more fascination, connection, and compassion in this exhibition than they do in our others, which is what we wanted. So that yellow star in the middle shows that, and all those feelings are precursors to change. So a good sign. That's not just a result of the narrative approach and using Māori, of course. Other things contribute, like immersion. So I'll come to that soon. The second interpretive principle we followed was empowering. An example is the current, which asks visitors for their responses to big environmental issues and empowers them to have their say. So people place themselves along a spectrum from excited to angry. They can also write a longer response, and they're asked for basic demographics, age, location, gender. And they can see their views projected instantly on the wall. And those visitor responses are also stored in a public database where anyone can access and analyse them over time. To develop the current, we consulted other government agencies and environmental psychologists. We knew, of course, that the data wouldn't be as high quality as in controlled studies because we needed to engage museum visitors, but the researchers were still interested and keen. In the first 2 years in our country of just 5 million, we received 85,000 contributions on 3 topics, and that was even after losing half of our audience, internationals, when the borders closed. And more than 50% wrote free text comments. So to put that into perspective, 85,000 equates to 37% of Wellington's population, where we're located. And that proportion of LA's population would be almost 1.5 million. So people clearly want to have their say. Landcare Research, one of our partners, contributed this topic. Nature helps us get through lockdowns. Workplaces should give back 1 day a month for nature. And they analysed the comments using what they call the Nature Futures Framework. And then they collated the common responses into poems, which showed both positive and negative responses like these. So on the left, you can see some of the key Māori concepts coming through, like mana and mauri. On the right, I don't care, happy to go to the mall. So very diverse perspectives. On banning petrol cars, you can see that Gen Z on the right appears to be more excited and hopeful. You can see that in those light blue and orange pointy lines. More hopeful than people who are age 65 plus on the left. You look in the centre at that dark blue angry spike. Grey's pretty high there too, don't care. So quite a difference across ages, as you might expect. If you want to know more, you could look for this blog on our website with some recent analysis on a provocation about climate change resilience, which we posed after Cyclone Gabriel devastated parts of the country earlier this year. Okay, another example of empowerment, but more around how visitors interact with the exhibition, is digital labels, which we use for our mass displays. So they let visitors choose what they want to find out instead of being overwhelmed with information on the walls. They also allow us to present content bilingually, again, without creating that book on the wall. You can see how sparse those wall labels are. We were really wanting to let the collection sing, if you like. And they also bring specimens to life through video and audio. Plus, they give us analytics. Visitors think they are, quote, really amazing, which is great to see. We've had, in the first 2 years, 2.4 million views, averaging more than 30 seconds each. It's interesting to see which is the most popular label, the endemic. So that's our most unique wildlife. The albatross and the moa are pretty popular too. Okay, on to the social principle, number 3. So if you remember, I said that 80% of our visitors are social. The Māori activator is probably the epitome of a social experience. Māori is one of those underlying messages. It's the life force that creates abundance. And here visitors place their hands on a beautiful Māori carving to nurture Māori. When they do that, wildlife emerges on the huge screen above. The more hands, the more abundance, because healthy Māori relies on that collective action that's critical to the concept. In the ocean scene here, the final payoff is a whale, which you can hear and feel through vibration as much as see. And you can also see work of artists from Mahitahi here, Fane and Ricky, and the wooden carving and a representation of Papatuanuku, Mother Earth, which is where the group is standing. Another social experience expresses whānaugatanga, or connection, and here a camera picks up people's bodies and shows them embedded with natural imagery. So it's a very simple concept, but it's very communal and joyful. So it's exactly that sort of connection we were wanting. People often dance in front of this, which is awesome to see. Making something social, though, can be as simple as making a display or screen big enough for people to gather around, as here, or displaying an image from a microscope on a wall so mum and dad can be part of exploring that with their child. The social principle often overlaps with the physical, which really refers to embodied learning. So not just pushing buttons, but matching the physical action that we ask of visitors in the gallery with the real action or concept being explored to support long-term learning in our bodies. An example is dropping, covering, and holding in the earthquake house. We actually used the same house as in our old exhibition, this one on the left, but we changed the experience inside, which had been very passive. It was just watching a video. We changed that into a very active one, where you do what you should do in an earthquake. And you can see that being tested on the right with some kids, school kids, and also some testing during installation. Another quite passive experience in our old galleries was the story of Zealandia splitting from Gondwanaland 80 million years ago, which explains why our wildlife evolved to be so weird and unique. So that was on a video on the wall. This time we made it more physical too. We projected it on the floor so visitors can follow those land masses with their bodies as they separate, as you see here. So it just helps to understand the concept more and make it a bit more fun as well. Another example, rather than talk about how much the South Island giant moa weighs, it's extinct by the way, why not let people see if they can collectively match its weight at 240 kilograms? But these 4 kids don't even get close. They weigh a bit more than a stout-legged moai. Those scales are just industrial scales. Physicality can be as simple and cheap, of course, as touching replica kiwi claws and smelling stinky birds. Our birds are actually especially smelly because they can be, or they could be before colonisation, when there were no mammalian predators. The great value of using all the senses was also really stressed by our disability advisory group, offering those different ways into content. You can see them here. We tested with them as well. So what do visitors say about these social and physical opportunities? They name interactivity as a major driver for learning. That first quote there kind of perfectly expresses learning theory, really. The interactive part, such an effective way to learn, unforgettable. So the key word there is unforgettable. Doing is remembering, remembering is learning. Lots of positive responses. We have done some special research into the earthquake house for a partner, and that shows how much it's visited by 50% of our visitors, and certainly that the main message is getting through the intended one, drop, cover, hold, because of that embodied experience. It's interesting that our international and domestic visitors respond quite differently based on their different experience of earthquakes. Here they're pretty common, they're pretty familiar for us. The interpretive principle of immersion is related to the senses too, and an example is the nest. That's the central emotional turning point where we move from uniqueness and wonder to threat. And inside, you're surrounded by bird song. People are asked to touch an egg to find out which birds are thriving, threatened or extinct. And they help to create the soundscape as they go. And through that experience, they discover that actually 20% of our birds are extinct. So it's a beautiful space, but a very sad experience. A visitor volunteered this feedback. I'll just let you read that. It's quite powerful. Her son wants to bring back the extinct huia because of his experience in the nest. And the second comment really shows how emotional people can get in the space, brought tears to my eyes. So immersion really has a big impact on emotional connection. You can see in the pic on the right some early testing with kids around this experience. So finally, real. Well, this principle does, of course, refer to real specimens like our colossal squid. Real things are a critical point of difference for museums, of course. But for us, it also refers to real-world opportunities to make a difference, like making a personal pledge to combat climate change, as the woman is doing on the right. So that's a culmination of an immersive digital game called Climate Converter, where you have to work collectively to restore the Māori life force and create a carbon zero world. And you do that by activating various community responses around the walls, like less dairy, more public transport, windmills, etc. And then you can make your own pledge, which transforms into a bird, like Maui can do, and joins the yellow kōwhai tree. You can choose to receive an email with more information to help you put that pledge into action. So the Climate Converter actually represents various interpretive principles, social, physical, immersive, all at once. Another example of this real-world connection is supporting people to actually volunteer for conservation efforts via a special website at the top, after they've been inspired by videos of diverse communities taking action around the country. So we've created around 20 action AVs, and they're all crowdsourced, so communities create them and we've edited them together. What do we know about Climate Converter and our action AVs? Well, in the first year, almost 100,000 visitors made a climate change pledge and 8% opted for the email. In relation to the action videos, 11 signed up to volunteer in our 1-month sample. Not massive, but actually more than we expected. So really encouraging. And what about the exhibition's overall impact? The circle shows that at least 10% of visitors leave inspired to make a change. So they say that that best describes the exhibition for them. And in those top 4 bars, lots of learning is going on too. Taught me something new best describes the exhibition for 61% of our audiences. So none of these are mutually exclusive options, of course. In post-visit interviews, 25% said that the show had altered their views on climate change and conservation. And in an optional post-visit survey, 68% said that it actually changed their behaviour. Now, it's really hard to say if that actually is the case, and numerous factors influence behaviour. This is just what people said, but it's certainly hopeful that we're working in the right direction. And we capture all of these insights on what we call our audience impact model, which shifts from really basic engagement on the left, immediate response, that's where visitor numbers come in, through in the middle, fact-based learning, then on to deeper learning, and then on the far right, personal and community action, the ultimate goal, really. So the orange circle in the middle shows the key message of connection coming through. It's also lovely to see those examples of behaviour change on the right, get a rat trap, etc. In terms of visitation, Te Taiao is now the most visited exhibition in the museum. Even in the first year with our 2-month COVID closure, we were above target, which you can see here, and satisfaction is also very high. And the exhibition's won quite a number of awards too, but that's not really what it's about. We are much more interested in learning and broader impact than just these numbers. Before I wrap up, I wanted to just come back to some pictures of our wonderful team. The success of Te Taiao Nature is very much down to them and their passion for the natural world. They were an incredibly committed group, the many hundreds involved. It was a very tough project, but we also had a lot of fun. Good way to relieve pressure. That's one of my daughters down the bottom, upside down on my chair one evening, waiting for me yet again. She's a bit older now. And I think this visitor response sums things up pretty nicely, I reckon. We're very happy that visitors are taking this sort of thing away. So that's my slides. I'm happy to go into some of the learning from the project too, but perhaps it's best to go to questions first. Either do either. Stop sharing for now. Lost my cursor.
Cool. Kia ora, Frith. Thanks so much for a wonderful presentation. And I've obviously seen you do presentations about Te Taiao and heard about it many times before, but every time I always learn something new, and some things I took away this time were the depth of mātauranga embedded in the process and in different parts of the space. I thought was really amazing. And just for me, as you said, for the first time in 20 years, to have such an amazing interactive and in terms of an interpretive sense, engaging space in our National Museum with such high visitation is just such a spectacular and cool thing. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, if you could put them in the Q&A section and we'll get to them shortly. So we have one question so far, Frith, and the first question is from Don. And Don's question is a financial one. So he was wondering about the budget per square metre or the overall budget for the project. And he says, thanks, very impressive.
Oh, cool. Thanks for the question. Yeah, our initial budget was 9 million New Zealand dollars for the show. It's about what did I say, 1,500 square meters. I can't quite remember the square meter cost. You can probably work it out. But the thing I would say is that we knew pretty early that $9 million wasn't going to be enough for the sort of immersive and interactive experience we wanted to create. So a big focus for me was in selling the concept. As an overall concept, we got $2 million from Lotteries grant, and then another 1 million from pitching some of those really immersive experiences in the gallery. So the nest, the Māori activator, and was it the Earthquake House, that we basically pitched to different bodies and they funded. So that was it was a bit touch and go for a while, but that was the way we managed to achieve what we did. One thing I would say, one piece of learning there, the budget for the build and the exhibition development were connected, and quite a number of things came up in that build side of things that started to erode the exhibition development budget. So in terms of learning, next time we will separate those two.
Great. We have another one from Don, which is, what would you do differently if you could do it all over again?
What would I do differently? You know, on the whole, I'm really proud of the team and the experience we created. I mentioned earlier that I would have loved to have had Brad sort of permanently on staff, and that went for a number of our the people we involved, I think. I think with such a big team, we struggled quite a lot in terms of making sure that processes were really clear and roles and responsibilities were really clear. I think we could have done better in the early days to set that up and really bring everyone on board. We got there in the end, but with so many people coming in at different times, that clarity is really, really critical. What else would I say? I probably wouldn't say more time, you know, timelines are good really in the end. We had some challenges during the process in that we went through an organizational restructure, which did make things hard, but that was out of our control. On the whole, I think we did our best. Yeah.
Great, and that kind of segues very nicely into Chuck's question, which was, what was the timeline from concept to opening of the space?
Yeah, the Natural History Zone was actually going to open before our new art galleries initially, but we flipped them for good reason. Art shows tend to be a lot easier to develop. So let me think. When I returned to New Zealand from the United States, beginning of 2016, we really embarked then. So 2016, 17, 18, 3 and a quarter years, I'd say. There was a little bit of a false start before that, when we did have an external group do some work with our team, but our team wasn't that happy with the concept. So we kind of started from scratch at that point, but from that point, it was 3 and a quarter years. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. We have a question from Rachel here. Rachel says, I love hearing about the impact of using the voice of Maui as a guide and narrator of the exhibit. Has this approach impacted the creative and planning process for future exhibits at Te Papa?
Yeah, a really good question. Yes, seeing the success of that approach definitely makes us think about storytelling and the sorts of techniques we can use on further shows. In some ways, actually, Te Taiao was bouncing off other experiences we'd had before. So one of the first shows where we used a really strong voice was in our Gallipoli show, which is about the Gallipoli campaign in World War I, that opened a couple of years earlier. And there we used the voice of the soldiers to tell that story from their perspective. We took that into another experience, Bug Lab, which is touring the US. It's the voice of bugs who have so much to teach us. So in some ways, you know, you can see us exploring it in different contexts. It's not, our first person voice is not always appropriate. We don't use it all the time. But certainly, yeah, thinking about voice, character, genre. We thought a lot about the genres of the different spaces, drawing these storytelling ideas from other contexts is something we're kind of lucky enough to do with a professional writing team as well. But yeah, we definitely trying to push things there in that way.
Great. Frank has an interesting question. It's, did you need to hire new staff to maintain the exhibits? Obviously, you've got some big ticket items in Te Papa, in Te Taiao, sorry.
Oh, that's a really good question. And that kind of comes back to learning or what we do differently next time. We haven't, and it's really difficult to keep up the spaces or the parts of that show that we'd like to keep up. Initially, actually, the aspiration of our leadership team was that this would be changing all the time, this space, and it was actually the team who said, well, I don't think that's a good idea. We're not going to have the resource to do that. And we also need a really strong backbone. We need an experience that people can come back to and enjoy, our repeat visitors. So we designed it with pockets of change. There's this, overall powerful experience, but there are parts where, for example, we feature new research from our natural history team. There's an activity where you can design a rat trap, your own rat trap, and that was intended to change. There are other lo-fi areas that were intended to change. It's you may know this from your own museums, that once you're open, it's really, really hard to get a big enough team back on it to maintain it in the way that we'd really like to. So we are struggling, and we are taking that into the next phase of renewal for our other spaces now, and being quite careful about how we program that change in. Yeah.
Cool, wonderful. A really good thing to keep in mind. I've got a couple more questions. I've got one from Philippa. We've got Mani from Nelson Provincial Museum. I visited the exhibition recently and was impressed by the QR codes linking to the sign language videos. Can you speak about the accessibility considerations given to this exhibition?
Yeah, it's lovely that you noticed those. Those were actually added after the fact as part of a project, with that community. But in terms of accessibility generally in the show, you will have seen a slide where we worked with a disability advisory group to run through the full concept with them, get their feedback. We changed a number of components in response. So for example, when I talked about the Māori activator, and when the whale appears, you get that haptic feedback that's happening. That was one of the additions after talking with them. Some of the lighting we also changed. We did talk about whether Braille should be included. The decision was no. It's not used that often here. But yeah, we did run through, we've got basic accessibility guidelines as well, particularly physical ones. We did intend to have a low sensory setting for the exhibition. We can, turn off sound and raise lights and so on for groups to come through. That didn't quite reach the ambition that we had earlier on. So we do our best. I would love to have a full-time accessibility focused person and advisor on staff, tried to advocate for that. We don't have that person, but we do try and connect with the various communities as much as possible, particularly for the really big developments like this one, where it's so important. And there are various public programs that are run for different communities as well. Yeah.
Cool, fabulous. Thanks for that, Frith. I have a question from Jake, which is, has it been difficult to balance attracting, entertaining and engaging diverse communities within New Zealand with engaging the diverse international visitors?
Yeah, another good question. Not really. And the reason I say that, we're primarily here for New Zealanders. We are here to tell New Zealand stories and showcase New Zealanders' taonga treasures. What we know is that the international audience come here for that too. They want to know what's unique and special about our country and our people, our cultures. So there's no real conflict there. But we do have various things that we need to take into consideration when we create experiences. For example, that not everybody speaks English as a first language. So we are very careful about the language we use. We do use colloquialisms because that is part of flavour and emotional connection, but we have to be careful to make it understandable overall. We still need to create some audio tours for different languages through the museum once more spaces are refreshed. So no conflict there, I don't think, but certainly some considerations to take into account. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much, Frith. So I think we're just over time now. So with that, I just want to say ngā mihi nui, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation and such great insights into Te Taiao nature. And I'll hand over back to Chuck.
Thank you so much for a wonderful webinar today. Makes me want to book a trip to New Zealand as soon as possible. Thanks everyone for coming. I want to thank the Interpretation Network of New Zealand and Frith Williams, our speaker. We hope you gained a new perspective on interpretation in New Zealand. And please see our website, www.gahi.online, for information about our next webinar in the series and to register. And as I mentioned earlier in the taped entry, remember that interpretation is a seed, not a tree. So hopefully today we planted more seeds. Thanks for coming.